Hello everyone and welcome to the AE Tech Airsoft channel. If you like what you're watching, please like and subscribe to the video below. It brings me great pleasure to announce the release of the CNC machine chassis set for the TM MP7. We have been working on this for over a year now and it's been the most requested part for this particular model. We've fully reverse engineered this part from the original zinc alloy chassis assembly. And we've made a few enhancements to the chassis to improve its durability. So these are fully machined in-house on our CNC using 6061 heat-treated aluminum, which should outlast the lifespan of this particular replica. I'd like to add too that we have had pre-production models in the hands of our test team members all over the globe, and they have given nothing but praise to this product. We've just started shipping units as of today, so please check out our video for more information in the description below. In this video, I'm going to go over how to install the chassis set into your replica. We're going to start with the video assuming the stock chassis set has been removed, as I've shown right here. And if you'd like the instructions on how to remove the stock chassis set, I'm going to post a link to our enhanced sear video right here, so that you can see in detail how we actually remove this whole assembly from your MP7 replica. It's really not very difficult. So as always, I'm going to go over the tools we're going to use in this video. So we are going to be using some of the infamous Super Lube multi-purpose synthetic grease to relubricate some of the components in the new chassis set. We're also going to be using a number 0, number 1, and number 2 Phillips head screwdrivers for the various screws in the chassis assembly. We're also going to be using a 1.5 millimeter Allen wrench tool. I highly recommend using one of these MIP tools. They are the absolute best hex drivers on the market. You can use one of these Allen keys as well. These are very easy to strip the heads of the screws out with, though, so it's not the preferred tool. I would recommend taking a look at getting one of these. We are also going to use a 90-degree pick to help us with removing some of the springs and reinstalling them. And we're also going to use a little bit of Loctite, either 242 or 243, just to lock some of the screws in place. So with that being said, let's get into the video. So the very first step, once you've gotten your chassis out of your MP7, is going to be to remove the trigger bar spring, and the selector lug here. So these should come out pretty easily. Sometimes they'll come out when you remove your chassis. But I just hold the spring, pull out the trigger bar. We'll set that aside. Got our DDC Industries trigger bar right there. Very nice part we offer. We have our trigger bar spring. We'll set that aside. And then we've got our selector lug that should just pull right out. That's removing the trigger bar. Next, we'll begin to split the chassis open. So one thing I really want to mention again, and I mentioned this in the enhanced sear video, is you want to make sure that you release the hammer tension inside the chassis before you go and split this. It's very easy to do. So I'm going to use our 90-degree pick. And you can see in here we have our DDC Industries enhanced sear, or you might have your stock TM enhanced sear in there. We're just going to use the pick to pull that forward to release the hammer partially. And then we're going to pull over here on the semi-auto sear, and this should release the hammer. Yep, just like that. You really want to do that so that you aren't disassembling this under a lot of spring tension, or things might come flying when you go to remove the chassis half. So make sure you release the tension in the hammer. Okay, so now that the hammer tension's been released and we've removed the trigger bar and trigger bar spring, we're going to start removing some of the fasteners from the chassis set. So I'm going to start with the 3 up front here. You can go in any order you like, but I'm going to use my number 0 Phillips screwdriver and just start loosening these. Now that we've gotten those 3 screws out, we actually will not be using these in the new chassis. It comes with replacement screws that we'll be using, so you can go ahead and set those aside. We won't be needing them anymore. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 hammer unit bolts right here using our number 1 Phillips screwdriver. And with those bolts removed, there's only one more we got to do, and that's the large countersunk screw in the rear. We're going to use our number 2 Phillips screwdriver for this. Okay, and that's all the bolts removed, so now we should be able to lift the chassis off. Yep, there we go, and now we've got our chassis split in half. So before we go any further, we're just going to remove the last component that's in the right half of the chassis, and that's our bolt detent right here. So this is for your bolt release. This is actually what provides the spring tension in it. And what you're going to want to do is put your thumb over the top of the spring here, and I'm going to use the 90-degree pick, and I'm just going to push in this way just slightly and lift up, and then gently ease off all with the pick just so it doesn't go flying. So I just did that all pretty quickly, and now you can easily remove this without it going flying off into space. So that's removing that detent from the right chassis half. And actually we've stripped this all the way down, so we're going to set that off to the side here. Okay, so next we're going to strip down the rest of the left chassis, so the barrel and hop-up unit at this point will just lift simply straight out. We can set that aside. Next we can also lift out the hammer strut and spring here and pull the spring off just so it doesn't go flying anywhere. And once we've done that, we're going to flip this over, being very careful to make sure none of these springs come popping out of the hammer unit. And we're going to remove these 2 bolts here on the other side of the hammer unit assembly using our number 1 Phillips screwdriver. Okay, and with those 2 bolts removed, we can go ahead and lift off the left chassis. We've got our hammer unit here, and you can see our enhanced sear. Please take a look at our website and check this product out. It really helps with ensuring you don't get the dead trigger issue in your MP7 during reloads. So now on the left side of the chassis, we still have a couple more parts we got to take out. We're going to take out this bolt release lever next. So to do that, we're going to grab our number 0 Phillips screwdriver, and we're going to remove this bolt. Okay, set that aside. And with that bolt removed, we're going to go back to this side, and all you have to do to remove it is we're going to sort of lift this lever up and then pull it through the slot. Do note there's a spring here. It's not under a lot of tension, but you want to make sure to watch it as you remove this so it doesn't go flying. So I'm just going to lift this up. You can see I've already taken the tension out the spring, and we can just pull it through the chassis just like that. Very straightforward. And we'll set that aside over here for the moment. And in the next part of the video, I'm going to show you how to remove the selector detent from the chassis as well as the rubber plug, and that will finish the disassembly. Okay, so we're going to finish up the left chassis here. So if we flip over to this side, there's 2 more parts we got to remove. One is our rubber plug here, which is a stopper for the bolt release lever, and then we have our selector detent and spring. So the selector detent and spring I'm going to remove first. I'm going to use my 90-degree pick. You want to be very careful. It's easy to, the spring's really powerful, so it's easy to bend it during this process. But I'm going to reach in with the pick, and we're going to work the end of the spring out just like that. So you can see I got it started, and now I should be able to just sort of pull this whole assembly right out. And I'm going to point out one thing here. If you look at the detent closely, you'll notice right on this side there's a flat spot, and the other side of the detent is just round. That's going to be important later in the video when we go to reassemble, so just a note to make for now. So we'll set that aside. And then the last component is this little rubber plug. This should just pull right out very easily. I just use my pick, and it comes out just like that. And that completes disassembling both halves of the chassis. So we can set this aside, and then we can begin reassembly in the next part of the video. Okay guys, so to assemble into the DDC Industries chassis, it's really easy. It's going to be the exact reverse steps. So we're going to start by reinstalling our rubber plug that we just removed. So you'll notice on our chassis we've got a pocket milled in there for this, and all you need to do is push the plug into place, making sure that it sits nice and flat. You'll notice it does protrude slightly on this side to support the bolt release bar. So that's reinstalling that piece. We can grab our selector detent, and again we want to note where that flat side is. That's important because if we look at our DDC Industries chassis set, if you look closely right down in the slot, you can see there's a little bump that we've machined in, and that's meant to capture that detent. So we want to make sure that the flat portion on the detent is facing down towards that slot. So flat side down. And we can just go ahead and drop this in. You may find it easier to temporarily remove the spring. And again, flat side down. Drop that in and slide it over into position. Once we've got that end installed, we can go ahead and push our spring in. And then I'm going to make use again of my 90-degree pick, and I'm just going to carefully push the spring into place. Again, you want to be kind of gentle here. It can be very easy to bend the spring, so be careful. I'm going to work it in here really carefully. And there we go. That's installed now, nice and flat inside of the slot. So in the next part of the video, we will go over installing the bolt release lever. Okay guys, so to install the bolt release lever, again, it's the exact reverse of what we did on disassembly. So I'm going to pick up my lever here. I've still got my spring sitting in my pocket, so make sure that's in place. You want to make sure that's preloaded, and you can see it'll pop out there, so just be careful. And we're going to install it just like this through the chassis at a sort of an angle. And then once the spring sort of touches the chassis, I'm just going to hold everything with my finger and flip it over. And you can see we want to make sure I'm kind of constantly holding the lever in place. I'm going to push it inward. That puts the tension on the spring, and simultaneously I seated it on this boss that we machine on the side of the chassis. So now it's fully seated. We can even test it out quick. And you can see we've got our spring action right there. And then on this side, we're going to reinstall this small flathead screw using the #1 Phillips screwdriver. There you go. So one thing I did forget to mention there, when you go to reinstall this small flathead bolt, we do recommend just applying a very tiny amount of Loctite just to make sure that doesn't come out. You really don't need much. So you want just a tiny bit of Loctite on the tip of that bolt, and then we can just go ahead and reinstall it. It does not need a ton of torque to reassemble. You can see the amount of Loctite I have right there. I just thread it down, and once it bottoms out, I give it just, again, my 3-finger rule, not even full force, just a little bit more. That's all you need to do. Now the bolt release lever is reinstalled, and we can move on to the next step in the reassembly. Okay, so our next step is going to be to reinstall the hammer unit. So we're going to pick this up, and again, just be very careful that when handling this, you don't want any of these. There's several springs here that can go flying. So just make sure when you're holding it, cover the springs with your fingers so they don't go flying. I'm going to flip it over, and this is the orientation it's going to go into the chassis. We want to make sure we keep the hammer in the up position. We want it decocked when we reassemble it, just to make installing the hammer spring a lot easier. So I'm going to line that up down here and drop it into the chassis and hold it in place with my finger. And we're going to flip this over. Now I'm going to reinstall these 2 screws. I'm going to recommend that you apply a small amount of Loctite to the tip of these bolts, and then we're going to thread them back in place with our number 1 driver. Okay, and if you notice there, I went back at the end and gave it just a little bit of torque. Again, you really don't need much torque. 3-finger rule, and again, I wasn't even applying full force, just a little bit past where the screw stops. You don't want to over torque these, or you can strip out the hammer chassis unit. So with that reinstalled, we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, so with the hammer unit back in, we can go ahead and reinstall our hammer spring. So we'll move the hammer strut back down over here. We're going to slide the spring over the strut, and then you might just have to lightly compress this to get it to fit inside of the machine pocket here. We just kind of want it sitting there loose. Again, hammer forward. That way we're under minimum spring tension right now. And once you've got that installed, we can sort of get the hop up and barrel unit in position. Again, hop up unit should face up towards the screen. You're going to want to pull this spring and just seat it right into the chassis for now. It may not stay yet. It needs the other half of the chassis to hold it. So we'll just get that prepared. And now we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so our next step is going to be to prep the right chassis side. So as you might recall, we have to reinstall our bolt release detent. So I'm going to grab the detent spring from over here. And this is really easy to install. I like to sort of get it started like that, and then I'll put my thumb over the spring, and then you just push it in and then down, and it's installed. It should sit behind this small lip right here is where it should land once you've got it fully assembled. That's all we need to do to prep the right side of the chassis assembly. Okay, so next we're going to bring the 2 halves of the chassis together. For this step, we're going to need the screws that are included with the DDC Industries MP7 chassis set. So in your package there will be 2 M2 by 10 millimeter socket head cap screws, and there will be 1 M2 by 12 millimeter socket head cap screw. So the longer M12 screw is going to go in this bottom hole, and then these 2 larger ones are going to go in the upper 2 holes here. So you'll see that when we go to assemble it here in a second. So to assemble the right half on, we're just going to pull our spring and drop the right half into position. You might need to do that a couple times just to make sure that the spring doesn't get caught between the 2 halves when they come together. Oh, there we go. I think I just got it fully seated. Yep, so the spring's not caught. I can move my barrel unit, so that's a good test. And once you've got those 2 halves together, I'm keeping pressure on this. We're going to go ahead and reinstall these 2 hammer unit bolts, again using just a little bit of Loctite. Okay, now that I've got those 2 bolts installed, it kind of holds the chassis closed. Let's make sure our spring isn't caught up here. Oh, looks okay. So now we can go ahead and install our large bolt. Once again, using a little bit of Loctite. So I'm going to emphasize once again, you do not want to over torque these. I used barely any torque. Once the screw bottomed out, just a little bit past, and that's all you really need. The Loctite will do most of the other work. So now I'm going to take our M2x12. I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on that, and we're going to install that in the chassis next. Now that we've got the M2x12 installed, we're going to move on to the M2x10s. Same process, and you want to use, again, really, really light torque. Barely any once it's screwed in, and let the Loctite do most of the work. Okay guys, so now that we've got all our bolts installed, we'll just pick up the chassis. You should not see any gap here once you've got these installed properly. If you do, just make sure the spring didn't accidentally get caught in between the two halves, and just make sure it's seated fully. You should wind up with something like this. Should be very easy to move the barrel in and out for your hop-up adjustment. We preserve that functionality. We actually even tightened up the fit here, so you should see some more accuracy benefits from that as well. And with that being said, if everything looks good here, we're going to move on to the next step. Okay guys, so one of the last steps before we install this back into our MP7 replica is going to be to reassemble the trigger bar selector lever lug and the trigger bar spring. So the selector lever should get installed in this orientation. And we're going to put that right in this pocket here where it started. And we're going to bias it upward. Then we're going to take our trigger bar spring. If you take a look here, you're going to notice one side of the trigger bar spring has this 90-degree bend facing inward with the axis of the coil. We're going to line this end up with the hole in the chassis here, just like that. And I'm going to push this spring up just so it's sort of resting half on the flat area here and then half in the open area. And once I've done that, we're going to drop our trigger bar back in position, just being careful not to let the spring fall. And once I've got it installed, I'm just putting light pressure here to hold it. I'm going to flip the unit over, and now we need to hook that leg of the spring over the lug on the trigger bar. I like to use my 90-degree pick for this step. There we go. If you've got it installed correctly, you should be able to do this. Again, make sure you're keeping a little bit of pressure on the trigger bar while you do it, or it might come flying out, but it should come spring right back up. So now we've got our trigger bar assembly reinstalled. There's only one more step before you put this back in your replica, where you can go ahead now, and again, holding the trigger bar, I'm just going to reach in my finger and recock the hammer. You're going to want to do that or you will not be able to slide the bolt assembly back into the chassis. At this point, if you want to see the rest of the reassembly, I'm going to put another link here to our enhanced SEER video where we go over this in excruciating detail. It's a fairly straightforward process, but otherwise you are ready to go ahead and use your new chassis assembly. So thank you again for watching this video. I hope you enjoy our products and content. We're really excited to bring this product out to the market, and we have many more products in the works for the Airsoft GBB world. So please subscribe to our channel and keep an eye out for future videos and products.